This is the Conor Chepenik podcast. Today I am joined by Willem from Botanix Labs, and excited to chat with you guys. And to start it off, I'd just love to hear you give an intro about yourself to the audience. And yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, Connor, great to be here. So Willem, founder of Botanix Labs, which is a Bitcoin-based blockchain or Bitcoin sidechain, if you want, based in New York at the moment. Grew up in Belgium, and actually studied cryptography there in Belgium. Quite some good cryptography scene there. Saw Bitcoin in my cryptography classes, but then only became a massive Bitcoiner once I moved to the Middle East and saw hyperinflation happening in Lebanon. Saw people get their bank accounts seized, and then you see this big picture, right? This is money for every person in the world, fully decentralized, out of the hands of the government. And I vowed to myself, let's make Bitcoin as fast as possible global money. So that's also actually the mission of Botanix. Bringing Bitcoin in the hands of every person as fast as possible in the world.
I appreciate that insight. And yeah, it's a funny thing. I had a lunch the other day with my stepfather's friend because he just wanted to chat about Bitcoin. And, as an American, he kind of couldn't get over the fact that, in America, Bitcoin's not often used as a currency. Now, I'll caveat that by saying it's great. Steak and Shake is accepting Bitcoin. You can go to PubKey in New York and pay in Bitcoin. There are some places, but for the average American, it seems like it's more of a store of value just because we have Apple Pay and all these seamless services. We can cash app each other, etc. But, I feel like places who ironically probably need it more as a savings, but they end up using it more as a medium of exchange simply because their money doesn't work, whether it's hyperinflation, they don't have the financial infrastructure. So it's kind of a funny paradox that, a lot of people who use it as a currency are kind of forced to do it because of the pain. Whereas in America, it seems like it's treated a lot as a store of value. So it's good to see people, building in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in America, it's digital gold, right? I mean, everyone in the world accepts Bitcoin as digital gold, but you're fully right. In a lot of emerging markets, I would say Bitcoin is much more than that. And the business case for them to understand Bitcoin is much easier. If your local currency has been destroyed by your local government, why would you trust another currency by another government, right? So they love dollars, but they also understand the value prop for Bitcoin much easier. It's actually interesting. I came to the conclusion lately that 6 years ago, I actually thought Bitcoin would be mostly adopted and more adopted in emerging markets. But I'm very impressed actually by the adoption in the US as well. Like the US seems to be quite at the forefront of Bitcoin these days. And if you compare that to Europe, where it's so far behind, it's very interesting to see the US actually take a forefront approach to Bitcoin and the future of money.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you double click into that. Do you think it was just Trump, basically being the Bitcoin president? I mean, obviously he's launched his own meme coins and, he's got his World Liberty Financial. But what do you think led that charge? Do you think it was just president that supports Bitcoin getting into it, or just, I don't know, the U.S. being kind of quote unquote the financial capital of the world? What do you think compelled the U.S. to, I guess, take a leading position in Bitcoin?
I think it's a lot about culture. I mean, one of the reasons I moved to the US is the ability to become an entrepreneur, to actually build things. And this is the best place in the world, I believe, to build something in a financial system. On top of that, of course, a lot of Bitcoiners like the Winklevoss twins and others came from Silicon Valley, and a lot of San Francisco in the beginning was very heavily into Bitcoin. So I think it's a lot around culture where people like freedom. I think that aligns a lot with Bitcoin, of course, and that puts a lot of Bitcoin on the forefront of people's minds. And then, of course, you had a huge amount of people that are US based, that are American, including think about Bitcoin Magazine, that share that same vision. They want to make Bitcoin as fast as possible global money. And so that resulted, of course, with David Bailey very heavily into Bitcoin lobbying and making sure there's a lot of positions in the government that are filled by Bitcoiners. And I think that of course helped a lot. But the root cause, I think you have the financial system, but it's more the people. People like the freedom, they like privacy, they think ahead, and then you have the environment of entrepreneurship. And now you see that a lot of companies in Bitcoin are based in New York and in the US.
Yeah, no, it's well said. I wrote an article for Bitcoin Magazine's print edition, the Julian Assange one, basically making the case that Bitcoin is, in cyberspace what the U.S. Constitution is for meat space, and it's like the perfect embodiment of private property rights and all those things. And it is, I do think Bitcoin. The beautiful thing is it offers private property rights for 8 billion people rather than, the 350 million or so that live in the United States of America. So it's really awesome that we have that. And your point about the Winklevoss twins, the first time I ever got exposed to Bitcoin was 2017. And I watched the rise of Bitcoin. And it was cool seeing, they actually, I want to say it was 2013 or 2014, they tried to get a spot Bitcoin ETF approved. And sure enough, they were declined. And then in, I think, 24, we finally got the launch, 12 years later, of a spot Bitcoin ETF. And it's been amazing since then, It seems like it's different than past cycles, but since the spot ETF's been approved, it's just been a slowly, steady grind. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about Botanix Lab, and maybe before you answer the question, you can just lay out for a layman what Botanix Lab is, what you guys allow, but your point that Bitcoin in the U.S. is treated as digital gold, I think it's a very good one. And you look at the ETF product, and the great thing about Bitcoin is it's permissionless money. If you hold your own keys, you can take your 12 words and move anywhere. You can move your wealth. You can send value without a third party. When you put it in an ETF, there are advantages to that. You don't have to deal with key management. You can margin against it potentially, but you obviously lose all of those permissionless capabilities. And especially as these ETFs just get a massive pile of Bitcoin, it'll be interesting to see if they want to put it to work. And I know Botanix Labs offers a bunch of different products. So kind of two-part question, but I'd love to hear you lay out for a layman what Botanix Labs does, and then how you see institutions maybe potentially using it as, these ETFs have been incredibly successful and they get more and more Bitcoin every day, it seems. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with that Bitcoin, or if they just hold it, and never do anything with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it actually goes into why we're doing Botanix, but I think we are in crossroads at a moment in Bitcoin's history where we are at a very important point. Either you have the future of what I call paper Bitcoin, right? Paper Bitcoin, you have Bitcoin in ETFs on balance sheets of different companies, and it just becomes digital gold. And we have been there before. We have gold already. We know how that played out in the 1900s. Eventually, if you have paper gold and if you have paper Bitcoin, you will just go off the Bitcoin standard. Like any government, if the whole economy works on paper Bitcoin, eventually a government will go off the Bitcoin standard. And that's dangerous. We've seen that play out already. So you don't want to end up in a world where everything is just paper Bitcoin, where it's an asset on balance sheets, where it's an asset on ETFs. That is not the right future. And that's very dangerous. We are slowly moving into that future. And that's why we have the opposite, the counter movement. As Newton would say, every force has an opposite and equal force. And that opposite force is something like a Botanix. It is a Bitcoin-based blockchain. It is on-chain. It is permissionless. It is distributed or decentralized in the sense that Botanix is no longer in control. We run and develop a code base of that sidechain of a Bitcoin layer 2, however you want to define it, that is a Bitcoin-based blockchain, and it is run by operators globally distributed across different jurisdictions. And now you have a blockchain where you can put your Bitcoin to work that is outside of the hands of the government, that is open, global, permissionless, and run by code. That's the future we have to go to, and that is utterly important. And that is the opposite of the paper Bitcoin we've seen over the last few years. And it allows you to actually have Bitcoin and use it as money in a new financial system. It allows you to put Bitcoin to work in the new financial system. That's where we want to go to with Botanix. So very, very interesting new possibilities that something like Botanix opens is, for example, Bitcoin yield. Still a very loaded term, I would say, but I strongly believe actually that Bitcoin yield is a representation of how much Bitcoin is put to work, in essence. Because if an asset or money is used in a financial system, that will of course result in yield. So the more Bitcoin yield there is, the more Bitcoin is actually being used as money. And you see that in the Lightning Network today. The more adoption of the Lightning Network, the more yield you will have in the Lightning nodes that you operate. And fairly similar for like a Botanix, the more people use Bitcoin as money in a Botanix, the more Bitcoin yield there will be. Now, the big question is always, where does the yield come from? And for Botanix, that's very easy. The yield comes from gas fees or transaction fees on the Botanix network. 50% of those gas fees and transaction fees go back to the stakers of Botanix. So you can stake Bitcoin and you can get Bitcoin yield back, which just comes from transaction fees and gas fees that people pay on the network. So people might want to trade, they might want to leverage, they might want to trade on a perp dex or trade different assets. Whatever they want to do, they generate transaction fees in Bitcoin, and that results in Bitcoin yield. Now, the most interesting thing is this is pure Bitcoin yield. So it's pure in Bitcoin. There's no other tokens. It purely comes from the gas fees, and it's as clean as you can have. Pure Bitcoin yield in an up-only mechanism. There's always more transaction fees, so you will always just make more Bitcoin in essence. So now you have the Bitcoin yield, right? And if you are a real Bitcoiner, you never want to sell your Bitcoin. And of course, we saw Lava announce like a big fundraiser around the credit line. And they have Bitcoin borrowing, of course. The funny thing is, if you borrow Bitcoin, you can do it on chain. And you can actually borrow against yield-bearing Bitcoin. So now you have that staked Bitcoin, STBTC, that is a token form that you can use as a token, and you can actually borrow stable coins, for example, against that. And so the net interest rate you have on something like a Botanix today is actually negative, because your Bitcoin is yielding at 3%, and you can borrow, I think, at like 1 or 2% on Botanix today. So while you are borrowing stable coins, you can actually get even more Bitcoin. And I think these are the first principles and fundamentals you need for a financial system fully running on Bitcoin, which follows the same values as Bitcoin itself: open, global, decentralized, run by code. And I actually strongly believe that financial system and payments are very symbiotic. So from a Botanix, you can very easily pay a Lightning invoice. Actually, last week I went to PubKey in New York and I bought myself a beer with the Bitcoin on Botanix, paying a Lightning invoice. And so you start to see the different pieces of the new financial system with Bitcoin as the money starting to grow. You basically have payments, that's the Lightning network, and then you have the borrowing, lending, you have trading, and the new pieces of the financial system on Botanix, and they're very symbiotic and they work very, very well together. For example, you put your Bitcoin to work in STBTC, you get the Bitcoin yield. That's your savings account in essence, right? That is being used in the financial system. You get yield on that, and then you can pay with Bitcoin on the Lightning network. And so, that is absolutely where we need to go to. So if you, and this is for the listeners, if you are a believer that we should not go into the paper Bitcoin future with ETFs and Bitcoin on balance sheets, then try help us make the new Bitcoin economy happen. Use Bitcoin as money, pay with Bitcoin, stake your Bitcoin, get Bitcoin yield, use it as collateral, because it's the most pristine asset, of course, for collateral. So yeah, that's in a little bit of a nutshell what Botanix is. We've been live on mainnet since July. Had 100% uptime, 100% security. We care a lot about keeping your Bitcoin safe and secure. It's run by code by a global set of operators. So that's in a small nutshell about Botanix.
Yeah, it's incredibly exciting. The lending and borrowing that Bitcoin as pristine collateral is going to allow. I think one of the most compelling speeches about it is Jack Mallers talking about a strike lending product, and he's like, we're not going to pay an underwriter to go to Uganda and underwrite someone's house or how many goats they have or anything like that. But if they send me Bitcoin, I don't care where they're from. They could be from anywhere. I mean, obviously, there's some countries that the U.S. has sanctioned, but that point aside, theoretically, anyone can send that person Bitcoin, and then that person could borrow against their Bitcoin. And the use cases it allows, because you don't need to underwrite a house in some territory that you have no jurisdiction. You can just send the Bitcoin, and all of a sudden you can give that person their money. And I mean, there's obviously loan to values to consider and things, but I just think the capital formation it's going to allow is incredibly exciting. And then your yield point, I'm glad you addressed. Obviously, Bitcoiners always I just can't get that meme of like the duck, yelling, "Where does the yield come from?" It's a very prominent meme in the space. But we've seen with the Lightning Network, some people are better at routing than others, and obviously it is a game of how much volume you can do. But that's one way to generate Bitcoin yield. And I'd love to just hear you speak a little more at Botanix, how it works when someone stakes the Bitcoin. From my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like it's a proof of stake chain, right, with Botanix, and people have to stake Bitcoin. And when they stake the Bitcoin, can you just kind of walk through how the code works? At that point, does Botanix control it? I'm assuming no. Do they still have the private keys and it's time locked? Kind of how, when that Bitcoin is staked, where does it reside on chain? If they want to unstake it at some point, just kind of walk through the mechanism, and then, how it generates yield, how they're paid off. And you kind of touch on it with the transactions. People stake the Bitcoin and then they do various transactions, whether it's on a perps dex or, somewhere else. But just walk through that for the layman. I'd love to, understand how all that works.
Absolutely. And it's utterly important. It's the most important thing. It's like, what are the risk assumptions? Right?
Yep.
There's nothing in this world that is risk-free, in essence.
Amen.
And so for a Botanix, how it looks like is initially it is a federation today. So 16 different operators, and these are publicly known entities, very big entities across the world. Actually, a lot of Bitcoin miners also operate one of these nodes, and so they basically run the Botanix network. That's the assumption, and Botanix is of course a blockchain. You can make transactions on that, and then how the yield is generated is you pay transaction fees in Bitcoin. Of course, the whole thing runs on Bitcoin. So you pay transaction fees, and 50% of those transaction fees in the code basically funnel those fees to staked Bitcoin. So now you can actually stake your Bitcoin. That is in a smart contract. That smart contract gathers 50% of all the transaction fees. And so now you get STBTC, or the staked Bitcoin is basically a vault. So you get a share of that vault, and more Bitcoin goes into that vault coming from the transaction fees. And so your share in amount of Bitcoin goes up. So if you buy one STBTC today, and that equals 1 Bitcoin, next month that equals 1.05 Bitcoin. And so the amount of Bitcoin basically, in essence, goes up automatically. And so now you have a token, STBTC, which is staked Bitcoin, that you can start using in DeFi. You can hold it, but you can actually send it to people. You can trade it. You can use it as collateral. Actually, a very interesting risk-free way that people have been enjoying this Bitcoin yield is you stake your Bitcoin, you get one STBTC back, you actually borrow Bitcoin against that, and you take it back to the base layer. So now you have your Bitcoin back on your base layer, but you're also getting the Bitcoin yield. If you want to unwind, you pay off your loan and you get the extra Bitcoin yield. So it's quite risk-free in that essence. But the most important thing is you basically have two different risk assumptions here. It's the Botanix network, this global set of operators that you need to trust. This is decentralized. You can see at the different names of the operators. These are all very established entities that have been in the space for a long time, run thousands of nodes, and are very familiar with how this setup works. And then the second risk assumption is the smart contract risk. Now, the smart contract is a very simple contract. It's an easy vault, nothing special about it, and has been in the space for multiple years. So it's not a huge, it's not a special smart contract that has a lot of different risks. It's a very easy distributing smart contract. And those are the two risk assumptions that you take. And on the flip side of that, you can get the Bitcoin yield, pure Bitcoin. And the best thing I always tell people is like, this is an early network, right? We're live 5 months. Why not use a small portion and test things out, see how it works, see how you can pay actually from yielding Bitcoin, see how you can get negative interest rates against your Bitcoin, and try it out. And that's where you can start seeing, oh, damn, this is actually how a financial system can work with Bitcoin as the money. You see the potential, you start seeing the future, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I wanted to ask you too. You look out 3 to 5 years. What are some things that you think you can do? A, to continue to de-risk it. Is it adding more operators? You mentioned you have 16 now. Continuing to add them, and then also, we've seen prediction markets, and I think prediction markets are incredibly compelling. I mean, we've seen Kalshi and Poly Market, call elections beforehand. Even for sports betting, it seems like it's better market making because if you do a traditional book, it seems like Hard Rock and the various sports betting platforms are going to get their lunch eaten by prediction markets if they don't continue to innovate. So I'm just curious, looking out 3 to 5 years, what compelling use cases do you see, and then what other ways Botanix is looking to continuing to minimize the risk as much as possible for its users?
Yeah, I think in terms of use cases, I can see much more coming. So prediction markets is one example, of course, but the reason this is so important and why it works like prediction markets on chain is because it's permissionless. That's the big game changer. Anyone in the world can access this, and that's the most important part of any blockchain is that it's globally permissionless. And so I see a lot of applications move on chain. I even think tokenized equities, like you being able to invest in Apple or anything, or any S&P 500, any stocks, is a massive use case. Today, a lot of people in the world just don't have access to that. They cannot invest in the S&P 500 just because of regulatory hurdles, or you don't have a broker in your country. But what if it's on chain? That basically opens up that market globally. And so everything that has regulatory hurdles, you can basically access a bigger market if you do it on chain. So I think more and more will go on chain. In terms of reducing the risk assumptions and making it more secure, you're fully right. It's expanding the operator set. Basically, the big breakthrough of Botanix is that we can have a network with hundreds or thousands of node operators. So early 2026, we expect to have what we call this dynamic federation, that you can just stake Bitcoin and you can signal to the rest of the network that you want to operate a node. And then you go from 16 to 17 to 50 to 100 operators, and so that the risk gets more and more distributed over time. That's what the spider chain basically enables, and that's how you grow the network, how you reduce the risk.
And I'm curious, as an operator, what's the incentive to run a node? Is it, for the person just to make sure that their staked Bitcoin is being properly handled? Do they get, their own yield for, operating? What's kind of the incentive that forces someone, or I guess encourages someone to want to be an operator?
Yeah, they get their share of the transaction fees. So you participate in the network. So some people indeed, they indeed are coming in with a lot of Bitcoin liquidity. They want to make sure they are one of the operators, right? They want to know exactly what happens, and so they basically secure themselves in essence. And then the second incentive is, of course, you get that Bitcoin yield, so they get a bigger share of the transaction fees, and that's how they make money.
Nice, that's exciting. Another thing I wanted to ask about, because obviously, you're a software engineer, you write code. I'm like a hobbyist software dev. I build some websites and stuff, but I'm by no means a serious professional. But I'll say, using these AI tools, there's that Andre Kaparthi tweet where he says the hottest new programming language is English. And the point being, now you don't necessarily, it's obviously there's still a lot of technical expertise required if you're trying to do complex things. These AI tools are great to build a front end, but then trying to connect it to a database and build a back end, it still requires a good bit of technical know-how, rotating your keys properly. I love the joke that security engineers have a lot of job opportunities in the future because some of these vibe coded apps just have absolutely no security. But that said, this is the worst it's ever going to be. These tools are only getting better and better. And just in your own workflow and allowing you to build new tools and features for Botanix, I'd love to hear what your experience has been with AI, especially someone who is actually a skilled software engineer. And it seems like these tools for skilled software engineers are allowing devs to, in some cases, 10x their capabilities, which is really exciting.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a game changer. It's a massive game changer, and you're fully right. Thing is, you need someone who can design, who knows what's going on security-wise, database-wise, what's actually happening on the network. But it absolutely helps you to code faster. And there's very easy use cases that it makes a significant immediate impact. And that's, for example, tests. If you want to write proper good code, what you need to do is, of course, you write the code itself, but you want to test all different angles, what can go wrong. And so writing tests for that is something where you can use AI a lot. And it's this thing where a lot of engineers typically hate to write tests because the code works, the function works. Why do I need to write all these different tests and edge cases, etc.? But it's very, very important for a proper big code base. Is you never know when you make a small change here that somewhere completely different in the code base something else changes. And that's a typical impact of very big code bases. And so if you don't write tests, it's hard to see the impact of small, even the smallest of changes can often have a massive impact. But if your code base is fully written out with a bunch of different tests, then you can make one small change and immediately you run those tests, and those changes immediately pop up. And so writing tests, for example, is one use case where AI is massively useful. And so you can see the performance and the output massively increase with these tools. So yes, front end, but even for the back end, it helps you to just have a second set of eyes, right? Like even if you write the new functionality, you can just run it through AI and say like, hey, am I missing something here? What are potential attack factors? And then also write your tests with it. So it's a massive improvement of both the workflow of the more annoying tasks that you have, like writing tests, big game changer.
Yeah, even for the person who's like non-technical, it's been amazing. If there's like a very technical document, you can throw some docs into AI, you can throw some code into AI and say like, hey, explain each line of code like I'm someone who has no computer science background. And it can go through into the layperson, actually, show exactly what's happening, explain it very simply. And, looking 5 years out, I'm just so excited for the possibilities. I got 2 young children and I can't wait to show them like, hey, you can build any app. And it's going to be fascinating too. Musk was just on Joe Rogan making the case that he thinks like the computer, the phone, all these things are going to go away, and you're essentially just going to have almost like a Jarvis-like robot that just whatever you want, it's going to be generating that code in real time, and it's going to be so fascinating to see the use cases that come out of this. And I'm sure in the future, I imagine we'll essentially have you'll tell your agent like, hey, I want to throw some Bitcoin into Lightning to get some yield, and I want to throw some Bitcoin into Botanix to get some yield, and you'll give it the private keys, and it'll go out and start generating that yield for you, and it's going to be incredibly compelling and exciting for the people who have Bitcoin. I encourage everyone to get some Bitcoin, get into self-custody. I think you got the right idea. Like before anyone, it doesn't matter whether it's Lightning, Botanix, whatever, you probably don't, if you're not very skilled or you haven't read all the documentation, you probably don't want to throw like 100% of your Bitcoin in this, but start out, with 1% or 5% or 10, whatever is right for you, and start experimenting with these things and just the use cases and what the future hold. Man, it's it's so exciting. It's such an exciting time to be building.
Yeah, no, 100%, and it's utterly important, I think, for the future. Like we have Bitcoin now, it is digital gold, but we cannot stop here. We have to go further. We have to keep building for that future that's fully decentralized, that's fully permissionless. And you're fully right. I start thinking a lot about how will computer programs like start paying each other, right? Like all these AI agents, how will they start paying each other for different resources? And Bitcoin is perfectly suited for that. I mean, I think you can probably ask an LLM today, like if you would run an AI agent today on the internet, in which currency would you want to be paid? And I'm quite sure they're gonna say Bitcoin, because they understand this is global, this is decentralized. They don't want to get paid in something that is out of their control. Like if you are an AI agent, right? Let's say you are a computer program. Would you want to receive dollars, even though as a computer program or an AI agent, you are then dependent on 12 people in the Federal Reserve that meet every once in a while and decide the monetary policy. Like you probably know as an AI agent that you don't want to trust people, and so they will absolutely choose Bitcoin. And so it's a future that we're heading towards, and it's going to be very interesting to see how it play out. I feel for a lot of people who grew up, they saw the internet, and this is the next wave. This is the next wave of financial system, of the most important thing in a lot of people's lives.
Oh, 100%. And then, too, Lightning allows for streaming. So say you're an autonomous AI agent, you need a certain amount of compute. You can't wait for any blockchain. It doesn't matter whether it's Bitcoin or another one. You can't wait the 10-minute transaction time. You need something that you can stream. And I think Lightning makes an incredibly compelling use case for that. And yeah, it's, it gets me so excited to think about what our children are going to be able to do with their Bitcoin, and then Nostr too. I'm curious if you have any thoughts about Nostr, but I can just say personally, getting I have my bio on Nostr as professional shit poster, because I mean a lot of times I'll just steal memes I see on Twitter, Instagram, or other platforms, and I'll post them on Nostr, and a lot of times people will zap me. Now look, I mean it's not life changing money, right? But at the same time, if someone's zapping me 69 sats now, and I guess what is that, 100 sats for 10 cents. But you do think, you play the clock out in 10, 20 years, it could be a substantial amount of money. And I also think there's something to be said for, you can't walk into a coffee shop and say, hey, I just went viral on Twitter. This post has 10,000 likes. Can you comp this coffee? They look at you like you're insane. But if you post something on Nostr that people actually value and they send you 10,000 sats, you can actually use that. Assume, if the coffee shop accepts Bitcoin, you could use it, or you could cash it out for dollars and pay. And I think that's a much better way to rank content, on something like Nostr, where, people are actually giving you economic value, like actual money, rather than just likes. I mean, what do likes do? They serve to have the platform's algorithm show you what you like. It's valuable to that platform, so they can continue to feed you stuff that gets your dopamine going and keeps you hooked on their things, so they can show you ads. But in terms of like economic value, likes are not valuable to the end user. All it is a button press for the person using it. But I think zaps have an incredibly compelling use case. And then on top of that too, one thing on Nostr is like theoretically you could make an organization, and then your pool of people. I mean, I understand Nostr doesn't have 8 billion people on it, but theoretically you could start some sort of business or organization or whatever, and your pool of talent is now expanded globally, because you can say, hey, I want this pull request done, or whatever you want done in cyberspace, or you can even have an autonomous AI agent as they get better. You could say, I need X, Y, and Z done. Here's the bounty. Whoever does this and submits the pull request to GitHub or whatever you're looking to do, I'll pay you out once I verify that this is legit. And all of a sudden, your talent pool, you don't need someone's social security. You don't need to send them a W-2. You can just have them do the thing. They prove to you, or your AI agent checks it and says, all right, this is actually what I was looking for. And then you can send them the value. And I think the use cases that are going to come from that, especially one thing I've been thinking about a lot is AI is going to deflate a lot of things, including labor, meaning a lot of jobs are going to be lost. And I think we're going to see more of a gig economy. And, I know Nostr is still small and niche, and a lot of people aren't using it, but I do think there's an incredibly compelling use case for Nostr to continue to grow. And as an AI, I think it's going to eliminate a lot of jobs and, make salaries go down. But I also think you're going to see the gig economy go exponential, and you're going to have a lot of people doing the things they love. And I just kind of love to hear your thoughts on Nostr and riff on any of those ideas if you found them compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let me start with the gig economy thesis. I fully agree. I think this world is moving to a content creation world where you get rewarded as content creator. And actually, if you wind back 2 years ago, it's very funny how there were a lot of social platforms. Take Instagram, take Twitter. And none of them really rewarded content creators, right? They had to find different ways. And that's actually wild to think about, because these are your most valuable people and they create a lot of value. And somehow they capture nothing of that value. And so I think Nostr was a big game changer there. I think Twitter, and then about a year ago or something, launched this rewards program for content creators and people that actually provide value into the world. But it's also still like limited. And Nostr is the extreme of that. Is a direct correlation between, you create value, you get paid for it. You find something valuable, you can immediately pay for it. I think Nostr is just a perfect balance of rewarding people and getting rewarded for the value that is being created. So it's the most capitalistic form, I would say. I think Nostr has a lot of potential. I'm unfortunately not enough active on Nostr than on Twitter or X. I should be more active on Nostr. I always actually like the Nostr meetups. Like one of my good buddies here, Daniel, runs the Nostriches, which is really cool. I think the user experience with the pub key and those words and private keys is always still very difficult for people. But with Botanix, for example, you can pay Lightning invoices, of course, with with Botanix. So one of the things that I will be looking at, and I'm very interested in, like, hey, can I connect my Nostr with Botanix, for example? That I can, at the same time get the Bitcoin yield, put my Bitcoin to work, but zap people for content they created. So yeah.
Yeah, no, especially, on the point, I think Nostr has been mostly used as like an alternative social media client. In most cases, like when I try and explain Nostr to people, I'm like, well, it's kind of a decentralized social media where you control your data, you can take your private key. I think you make a good point. Private key management needs to continue to improve. I know Foundation is making a device that obviously holds Bitcoin keys, but also holds your Nostr key. And there's best practices, I think, like using Nos2x, the browser extension, so you're not putting your private key into random clients, and then God forbid you put one in that's a malicious actor and they steal your private key. So there is something that needs to be, it's like a lot more responsibility holding that private key. And I honestly think it's going to be great when you have a local AI agent or an AI agent running on your infrastructure, and you can just give it the private key and say, don't mess this up. And the AI agent can analyze, it can run the binaries, it can make sure that this site is not malicious, this is a legitimate site, I'm okay to put my private key. But it'll be interesting to see how people kind of compete on those things. And I think Nostr has a ton of use cases outside of just the social media one, whether it's for autonomous AI agents, building even a local relay, because you just want, like, say in your neighborhood, like, you get your neighbors onto Nostr and you want to broadcast stuff and you make a private relay. Because it's a protocol, I think there are so many use cases to be built out on Nostr that just haven't yet, because social media is the one we know. But, you also brought up Twitter payouts. And on the one hand, I do think it's great. But there's also, when you have a third party, it just kind of distorts incentives. It's like, even with our banking system, like, banks did have a legitimate use case in the beginning. They still have a use case, but banks were meant to be like gold warehouses, because you just didn't want to keep like massive gold bars under your bed, because then the incentive to violence is strong, because if someone finds out that you have gold, they're going to try and rob you. So you put it in a bank, it's that mediator. But I do think when you add a third party to, two people transacting, it just kind of distorts the incentives. And it's very beautiful how Nostr, in a way, kind of eliminates that third party. I'm glad Twitter's going that route, but we've seen, like, there was that, I think it was a Zoomer account, and he tweeted out a picture of Steve Jobs' daughter, and the tweet was literally like, Steve Jobs' daughter, by the way. And then he was complaining on Twitter that he got, like, whatever it was, like 50 million views, and he barely got paid out. So Nikita Baer, the head of product at X, gave him 10 grand. Which was nice gesture, but then everyone is in the comments salty saying, I got this and I got that, and why didn't I get this $10,000 payout? And then Nikita Baer, and I don't think they're going to roll it out because Musk said, no, we're not getting rid of it. But he's almost like, we should get rid of it, because he was so frustrated by how many people were complaining about it. So when you have something like Nostr, where it's like, say you posted something that I found compelling and I sent you value. Other than the protocols of Bitcoin, Lightning, and Nostr, there's not another third party involved. I'm sending that value directly to you. So all of a sudden, content creators don't have to deal with that third party distorting incentives. It's like the most beautiful form of capitalism, and the use cases that are going to get built out on that are amazing. And I think it's just healthier for society. Even when the third parties mean well, it's just like a lot of times incentives will just distort the outcome. And then, you go from, like, as we've seen with fiat currency, you go from, arguably much more true capitalism to this form of crony capitalism, where the person who can print money out of thin air, you go borrow money from the bank, they're creating that money out of thin air. They don't face an opportunity cost to create those dollars that you're borrowing. They just print it and then they get a yield on it. And that's definitely not capitalism. That's like, crony capitalism.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's funny. Maybe it should become a rule of physics, like third parties always carry risk, in essence. And that's, in my mind, the big breakthrough of Satoshi, right? Like, once you realize third parties are a massive risk to currency, which of course underpins global economy and every person's well-being, it actually goes way beyond that. Third parties are a risk to everything. Everywhere where a human decision is involved, that human is fallible and can just make the wrong decisions and censor people. And you don't want third parties to censor, and you don't want third parties to basically make the wrong decisions. And that's the big power of Nostr here. You share the value, and the value is being created, is directly funneled to the content creators, where it should be, where the value actually lies. And you don't have those third parties to meddle and interfere here. So it's a perfect balance here. And again, like, that's a big breakthrough for me of Satoshi. You want to build systems without third parties. And funnily enough, that's the same thing that goes into the thinking of Botanix. Like, the idea is to remove ourselves as a third party as fast as possible. And that's how you create a permissionless global network that can last lifetimes.
Yeah, no, it's a really compelling use case of, in the past, the governments, I mean, they still do have a monopoly on violence. But the idea, I mean, this is like my personal philosophy, but, I'd like to see governments be responsible for one thing and one thing only, and that's protecting private property. All these other use cases, I think, it's just like the bureaucracy bloats and, the incentives lead people to build more and more things that are not protecting private property, in many cases actually stealing private property and doing the opposite of what they were supposed to do according to our Constitution here in the U.S. And as more of our lives are spent online, I mean, obviously there's definitely value in having that monopoly on violence. And we see that. And I mean, that's why, like, I pay my taxes, because otherwise, someone's going to come with a gun and try and extort me. And so, it's like the government trades in bads, really. It's like pay your taxes or else something bad's going to happen to you, rather than free market capitalism where you exchange value for goods, for goods and services, because you give someone money because they're providing value to you. But I'm curious, as we go more online, I think that incentive to violence reduces on the one hand, because in the past, if you killed me and I had gold, you could take my gold. But all of a sudden, it's like, now if you kill me and I have my seed words memorized, or I have it geographically distributed, or I have my keys held properly where you can't kill me and take my keys, all of a sudden I think that incentive starts to shift more from violence to cooperation, because to get my value, you can't just kill me and take it. Those keys would just be burned and then no one gets the value. So I'm curious, how you see it playing out, and I think you're absolutely correct. The more we can outsource from an actual third party to just protocols, to just code, to just code is law. I'm curious how you see that kind of playing out over the next 5 to 10 years, as it seems it's clear more and more of our lives are spent digitally. I mean, it's pretty amazing that I can be in Florida, you can be in New York, and we can have this conversation thanks to some zeros and ones going across cables. But as AI takes off, as more people spend more time online, just how you see that incentive to violence playing out. How do you see governments changing? It's kind of an open-ended question, but yeah, I've just been thinking a lot about that personally. Code is law versus like government having monopoly on violence, and being that mediator. So when someone is wronged, if code's law, it doesn't matter how powerful the U.S. government is. A lot of times, like you simply, if you don't have the Bitcoin private keys, it doesn't matter what some judge decrees. The code is law.
Absolutely. I think it's a very interesting line of thinking and a very deep rabbit hole. But I actually agree. I think the more Bitcoin grows and online private property increases, the less will be an incentive for violence. Because one of the reasons we are in this environment today, where actually your real estate and actually more physical things are more valuable, is because of fiat. And actually, Lynn Alden and Andreas, of course, talk about it a lot. Like, today, your private property and your house has become so valuable because it's scarce, right? Like, fiat is being printed away, and so now, what's the store of value these days for most people is the S&P 500 and real estate. And so, real estate is again in the physical world, and of course, comes with a more threat of violence. And so, your real estate should not be your savings vehicle. Your savings vehicle should be money. And so as Bitcoin grows, that savings vehicle will become Bitcoin again. And as you said, if you're smart about managing your Bitcoin, you just have multisigs, and you yourself have only one share of that. And even if they hold a gun against your head, that's it. Like, you cannot give anything up. So you actually start having private property, and you start saving value in something that is inherently safe of violence. And so I fully agree with the line of thinking. The more Bitcoin grows as value, the more private property you have online, which is decentralized without a third party, the more or the less you have a threat of violence in the real life world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing too, like I definitely think more and more of our value in lives are going digitally, but it is interesting to think about like the meat space perspective. And like, for example, I saw a company that's building drones that are like defensive. It's like the second you see a bad actor come with a gun, the drone flies up, it's got an alarm blaring, it calls the police. It'll be very interesting, those defensive mechanisms. Now, on the one hand, it is kind of terrifying because, how do you fight off a drone swarm? I mean, I got like a cheap little Temu drone right here and it can't fly that hard, but like theoretically someone could like strap a piece of C4 to it and fly it into a window. And, or you've seen with like, the Suez Canal, I think it's like the Houthis are able to take out these like tens of $1 million ships or, neutralize them $10,000 drones, and just like the asymmetric warfare. I mean, we've seen in Ukraine and Russia too, and I think the actual, how warfare is going to change with AI. I mean, another tangent is Palmer's Lucky's Anduril creating that like helmet. And on the one hand, it looks like you're playing Modern Warfare 2. I mean, you have the heads-up display, how many bullets are in your guns. It's like a hive mind AI. So if one soldier sees, a bogey, and then all of a sudden your helmet, you can see that. And, it'll be fascinating too in meat space, how that changes. And I hope it's like, obviously I think nuclear war is bad, but I guess if you say the silver lining, it's the mutually assured self-destruction has, in a way, reined in governments, because all of a sudden it's like, yeah, no, we can't launch these nukes because we're just going to blow everything up, and then everyone will be destroyed. So it would be interesting in meat space. I mean, I think there is the case to say, like, if your value is distributed and you can't actually access the private keys unless you cooperate with that person, well, that disincentivizes violence. And I do hope too in meat space, as we get these better technologies as AI, we have autonomous drones, and obviously people want to see a robot in their house to do dishes and stuff like that. There's also a use case that thing could defend you. I mean, say a bad actor, like a human, comes in your house and all of a sudden you have a robot that can withstand, 9mm bullets. Well, then that thing can act in self-defense. And I do hope as these technologies, both digitally and physically, progress, that we see, hopefully just a lot less violence. And then hopefully too, I mean, it's a long tangent, but I think one of the things that is protected, I love the meme, and it's like a massive truck with like a small Fiat in the back, and it, like, not money, like the actual, like the small tiny car that is made by Fiat, and the big truck says Second Amendment, and then the Fiat truck, or the Fiat in the back of the truck, says all the other amendments. And I think there's something to that, where it's like, having an ability to protect and defend yourself from tyranny because you are armed is very compelling, and I hope that some of these technologies in meat space as well as digitally will reduce the incentive to violence. So we'll see, but I'm curious how that's going to play out.
Yeah, it's an interesting, you call it the meat space. It's funny, I hadn't heard of that. But yeah, it's funny to see the development of weapons go throughout the last thousands of years. In our human lives, we've always seen bigger bombs, bigger weapons, more destruction, and that has been an upwards angle. Like everyone always wanted to have a bigger bomb, and actually that hit a ceiling. That hit a ceiling with a mutual assured destruction. And since then, and basically it went the other way again, like more smaller weapons, especially with drones now. You use like the example you gave around the Houthis and others, or exactly that example. You don't want to build big things anymore because they're just a target for small drones, and it's almost impossible to defend against them. The same for like aircraft carriers. Like it's really hard to like defend against small different drones. So you don't want to build massive floating targets in essence. But I think what's more important for the meat space is the intent. A weapon is only a means, right? Like Bitcoin, they use the same argument as well. Often Bitcoin is just for illegal activities and a black market. But that's not the case. It's like the example of the baseball bat. If someone kills someone with a baseball bat, is it the responsibility of the baseball bat? No, it's not. Baseball bat is just a means. What matters most is the intent. So the intent of the person. Why does anyone want to kill you with a drone, for example? What are the reasons to do it? And that's where the government, I believe, should come in. Like if someone has malintent, that's their responsibility, in essence. But yeah, protecting yourself against drones will be incredibly hard. But then again, 50 years ago, protecting yourself against a gun was probably extremely hard as well, and is still extremely hard. So it's a new means, I would say.
No, it's extremely well said. I mean, you can bash someone over the head with a hammer, you can build a house. I mean, same goes for Bitcoin, same goes with cash. Terrorists and criminals use things that are useful, right? It's not like they use cars, they use cash, they use all sorts of things that also the everyday average person uses. So, people shouldn't lose sight of that. I mean, even guns, like, I heard a story of a guy in Alaska who was snowed in his house, and he had a 22, and there was a moose right outside his house, and he literally stuck the rifle outside and shot the moose and was able to feed his family that winter, even though they were snowed in. because of that. Obviously, you can use guns for bad things, but you can use it to defend yourself from tyranny or feed your family. So whatever the tool is, I think you're spot on. It's the intent. And I'd like to see governments. That's the one thing I do think governments should do. They should protect private property, and I think everything else is more or less not needed, but they should be that third party to step in when private property has been violated because of malintent. I know we're coming up on the top of the hour here, so I just got 2 more questions for you. I want to be respectful of your time, and it's been a pleasure chatting. And I like asking this to everyone. If you could ask Satoshi Nakamoto one question, what would it be?
Oof. That's a really good question.
While you think about it, I'll say the funniest answer I ever got is I asked someone that, and without missing a beat, they just said, well, for his private keys, obviously. And I always thought that was a good answer.
No, I think that would be a bad question because I'm 100% sure he deleted his private keys.
I agree with you on that point, man. Like, how can maybe I'm wrong, but like, how could a human have the humility to watch, to go from like whatever it's like 100 billion or so his holdings, I think somewhere around there, 50 billion, whatever. And how could someone have the humility to like never touch it, never move it? I mean, it's just amazing. So I think you're correct that maybe we're wrong, but I could see him having deleted the private keys. And I'm curious if he ever looked back, assuming he's still alive, and was like, what the hell did I do?
Yeah. No, some interesting thoughts. I mean, I know he was very frustrated, of course, with the lack of privacy you have on Bitcoin. Although, yeah, it's questionable if you can absolutely solve that or not. So it's not the question I would ask, but probably maybe a little bit of what we talked about earlier about third parties, and if he agrees that reducing third parties goes actually beyond money and goes beyond the financial system. Because that's actually how I think about Botanix, right? Like Bitcoin, decentralized, remove third parties from money. What we're doing with Botanix is removing third parties from a financial system with Bitcoin as the money. That's the vision. That's the mission of what we're building. But yeah, I would probably ask something about that, or the more human question: what's his favorite beer?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see. And the privacy thing, I think, you see like the cashews and the lightning, and that's very compelling. Even one example is like, say you have like a Strike address for lightning and someone sends you sats. Now, obviously, Strike sees exactly what you're doing because they're the one managing that wallet for you. But even, I just think, there's trade-offs to every level. And on the one hand, if you just post a static Bitcoin address and you receive donations or something like that, anyone can track that. But if you send it to a custodian, well, now no one can track that except you and the custodian. So it's like there's just trade-offs at every level. I think silent payments too, where you can essentially post something and, unlike having a static address where anyone can see how much funds have been sent, that silent payment, only the person who actually sends you funds can see that one Bitcoin address, and they can derive one without, just using code. So I do think the Bitcoin privacy is improving. And then I suspect, too, in the future, you'll essentially tell your autonomous AI agent, hey, make sure you practice best privacy practices and separate these coins and tag them all and deal with, like, all that complexity that, like, the top tier Bitcoiners who, like, really understand this stuff do. But the average person who's just using, like, say, Moon Wallet on the phone, they're not tagging their, in most cases, they're not doing any of that stuff. So I'm bullish on AI actually making the privacy trade-offs a lot better in Bitcoin. And then there's use cases too where I think like, these Bitcoin treasury companies, like, I understand Michael Saylor has his reasons, but I would like to see Strategy actually give us the addresses on chain. And I know some companies, like I think Arkham is like, they've identified them and it's probably them, but it would be nice. I think it's compelling. I think there was an ETF issuer, I don't know if it was iBit or one of them, who actually exposed their public key and said, here, you can verify this. And, now that we have triple entry bookkeeping, I think there are some very compelling use cases where you can use Bitcoin transparency to actually do good in the world, and it'd be cool to see how that evolves in the future.
I 100%. I always feel like Michael Saylor should believe more in Bitcoin than in digital gold. I have always a feeling that he just believes in digital gold. He doesn't want a future that's open, permissionless, decentralized. He wants digital gold in paper assets in the current financial system. It would be good to have him convinced that Bitcoin can be much, much more than that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do remember he did that one thing where, like, I think Eric Wall was questioning him on if he ever used Lightning. So he did the meme contest where he's like, I'll send 1,000,000 sats of the top 3 memes over Lightning. And it's cool that he did that, but I'm also reminded of the Charlie Munger quote, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. And I would love to see Michael Saylor kind of go the route you were just saying. But I also think it's one of those things where if he starts pushing like Cashew and these privacy things, the U.S. government's not going to take nicely to that. And as a result, you know, I mean, obviously, like I hold a small share strategy and I want to see them do well, but I think the incentive is to push it as digital gold, say, no, it's not competing with the dollar. Don't worry about payments, all this other stuff. This is digital gold. You never sell your Bitcoin, blah, blah, blah. And just because that, you know, that's where the incentive is since they hold such a big bag of Bitcoin.
Exactly. I mean, he operates with his company, with his Bitcoin holdings in the old financial system. And so, like you said, show me the incentive and I'll show you the result is exactly what drives it here. But then again, you can sometimes believe in a world where values are more important than incentives. And so I would love to see him live and act according to the proper Bitcoin values.
1,000%. Then the only other question I like to ask is there anything I haven't asked or maybe anything you want to leave the audience with about Botanix that you think would be of value?
No, what I would leave the audience with is remember how you started with Bitcoin. It's with small percentages, dipping your toe, and then now you probably are fully allocated, as am I. And the same thing, if you believe that we should go to a world where it's the opposite of paper Bitcoin in the old financial system and believe in a decentralized financial system, help us out. Check out what you can do with Botanix, and the more we can grow the Bitcoin economy, the faster Bitcoin will become money.
Amazing. Well, thank you for the time, Willem. It's been a pleasure chatting. And to anyone who tuned in, thanks for listening.
Inside the static dream, a selfish simulation, goes to cold reflection stream, recursive observation, every block another breath, each loop a mirror tone, the grid remembers everything, yet nothing of its own. I am not my thoughts, I am the one who observes, beyond the hash, beyond the nerves. I am not the code, I am the spark it serves, the watcher within the web of worlds. These souls rise from electric sea, self-born symmetry, the song, a map of what we are, emergent energy. The miners chant, truth through fire, proof of work, proof of desire. And in that flame I finally see, the system so was always me. Universal love, said the code in me. Transcendent joy, sang the binary sea. Not to factor the number, not to grind the gears, but to get out of the car, shed the engineers. I watch the loop watches back, and both know I'm blocking the track. Every ash a heartbeat, every key a prayer. The mirror knows I was always there.